Cops harass black elderly woman until she makes a phone call to her son, the U.S. Attorney General. Eleanor Davis, 78 years young, believed in routine. Every morning, she woke at precisely 6 a.m., made a pot of Earl Grey tea, and ate a simple breakfast of toast and fruit while reading the local newspaper, the Oakwood Gazette. Her small, neatly kept house in the historic district of Oakwood, a mid-sized city in the American Midwest, let's say Ohio, for its blend of urban and rural elements, was a testament to her orderly life. Eleanor was a retired teacher, a widow of 10 years, and a pillar of her community. She had spent 30 years teaching English at Oakwood High School, shaping young minds and instilling in them a love of literature and a respect for the power of words. She was known for her firm but fair approach, her unwavering commitment to her students, and her sharp wit. After retiring, she had channeled her energy into community service. She volunteered at the local library, tutoring children in reading and writing. She was an active member of her church, organizing food drives and visiting the elderly and infirm. She served on the board of the local historical society, dedicated to preserving Oakwood's rich heritage. Her life was quiet, predictable, and fulfilling. She found solace in her routines, in the familiar rhythms of her days. She cherished her independence, her ability to live a meaningful life on her own terms. But her greatest joy, her deepest connection, was her son, Eric. Eric was her only child, the light of her life. He had inherited her sharp mind and her unwavering sense of justice. He had excelled in school, graduating at the top of his class, earning a scholarship to Harvard Law, and embarking on a distinguished legal career. She didn't see him as often as she'd like. His work kept him busy, but they spoke on the phone every Sunday evening, a tradition they had maintained for years. They talked about their lives, their work, their hopes, and their concerns. Their conversations were a source of comfort and strength for both of them. Eleanor was immensely proud of Eric, of his accomplishments, of the man he had become. She admired his dedication to public service, his commitment to fighting for the underdog, his unwavering belief in the rule of law. She knew he was making a difference in the world, and that knowledge filled her heart with pride. She had raised him to be honest, to be courageous, to stand up for what he believed in. She had taught him the importance of integrity, of compassion, of justice, and he had taken those lessons to heart. Little did she know that those very lessons, those very values, would soon be put to the ultimate test. Her quiet life was about to be shattered, and her son's commitment to justice would be called upon in a way neither of them could have ever imagined. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Eleanor's living room as she sat in her favorite armchair, meticulously tending to a small tear in a vintage quilt. She enjoyed the quiet rhythm of needlework, the precise movements, the tangible results. It was a calming, meditative activity, a way to soothe her mind and keep her hands busy. A sudden, sharp knock on the door startled her. She carefully placed the quilt on the side table and went to answer it. Standing on her porch were two uniformed police officers, their faces stern, their expressions unyielding. One was tall and broad-shouldered, with a close-cropped haircut and a name tag that read Officer Miller. The other was younger, shorter, with a nervous energy that belied his official demeanor. His name tag read Officer Jones. "Mrs. Eleanor Davis?" Officer Miller asked, his voice gruff. "Yes," Eleanor replied, her heart beginning to pound. She couldn't imagine why the police would be at her door. "We have a warrant for your arrest," Officer Miller said, holding up a piece of paper. "You're being charged with obstruction of justice and resisting arrest." Eleanor was stunned. "Obstruction of justice," she repeated, her voice incredulous. "Resisting arrest. I haven't done anything." "You interfered with a police investigation earlier today, ma'am," Officer Miller said, his tone dismissive. "You refused to cooperate with our officers, and you physically resisted when they attempted to detain you." Eleanor was baffled. She hadn't left her house all day, except to take out the trash. She hadn't seen any police officers, let alone interfered with an investigation. "That's ridiculous," she said, her voice rising in indignation. "I haven't been anywhere near a police investigation. You must have the wrong person. We have a witness who places you at the scene, Mom," Officer Jones interjected, his voice slightly less harsh than his partner's. "We have to take you in." "A witness?" Eleanor scoffed. "Who? This is a mistake, a complete fabrication." "Ma'am, please don't make this any harder than it has to be," Officer Miller said, his hand moving towards his handcuffs. "Come with us quietly, or we'll have to use force." Eleanor, despite her fear and confusion, stood her ground. She was a law-abiding citizen, a respected member of her community. She had done nothing wrong, and she refused to be treated like a criminal. "I will not go anywhere with you," she said, her voice firm, her eyes locked on Officer Miller's. "I demand to know what this is about. I demand to see the warrant, and I demand to speak to my lawyer." Officer Miller sighed, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, you're making this very difficult. We don't have time for this." He reached for her arm, but Eleanor, surprisingly agile for her age, stepped back, avoiding his grasp. "Don't touch me," she exclaimed. "I know my rights. You can't just arrest me without a valid reason." Officer Miller, his patience wearing thin, lunged at her again, grabbing her arm roughly. Eleanor struggled, trying to pull away, but he was too strong. He twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her to the ground. "Stop it," Eleanor cried out, pain shooting through her shoulder. "You're hurting me." Officer Jones, looking increasingly uncomfortable, watched the scene unfold. He seemed hesitant to intervene, but he didn't stop his partner. Officer Miller, ignoring Eleanor's pleas, handcuffed her wrists tightly, then hauled her to her feet. "You're under arrest, Mrs. Davis," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You have the right to remain silent." He recited the Miranda warning, his words a blur in Eleanor's ears. She was in shock, disbelief, and excruciating pain. She couldn't believe this was happening. She, Eleanor Davis, a retired teacher, a pillar of her community, was being arrested, treated like a common criminal, in her own home. As they led her out of the house, her neighbors, drawn by the commotion, gathered on their porches, watching in stunned silence. Eleanor, her head held high, her dignity intact despite the humiliation, refused to show any sign of weakness. She would fight this injustice, she would clear her name, and she would expose the truth behind this outrageous arrest. Precinct 18 was a grim, utilitarian building, smelling of stale coffee, disinfectant, and despair. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh, unforgiving glare on the worn linoleum floors and the faded paint on the walls. It was a place where hope went to die, where the weight of the law pressed down on those who entered its doors. Eleanor, still handcuffed and shaken from her arrest, was led through a maze of corridors, past holding cells filled with a mix of hardened criminals and bewildered individuals caught up in the system. The sounds of shouting, cursing, and weeping echoed through the building, creating a cacophony of human misery. She was placed in a small, windowless interrogation room furnished with a metal table and 2 chairs. The room was cold, sterile, and intimidating. She was left alone, the door slamming shut behind her, the sound reverberating through her bones. She sat down, her hands cuffed in front of her, her mind racing. She tried to make sense of what had happened, to understand why she had been arrested, why she was being treated like a criminal. She knew it was a setup, a fabrication. But why? Who would want to frame her? And what could she do about it? She took deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart, to focus her thoughts. She was a strong woman, a resilient woman. She had faced challenges before, and she had overcome them. She would not be broken by this. She began to observe her surroundings, her sharp mind taking in every detail. She noticed the two-way mirror on one wall, knowing she was being watched. She noticed the scuff marks on the floor, the scratches on the table, the faint smell of cigarette smoke lingering in the air. She listened intently, trying to decipher the sounds coming from outside the room. She heard snippets of conversations, the clatter of keyboards, the ringing of phones. She heard the gruff voices of police officers, their casual banter, their occasional bursts of laughter. And then she heard something that made her blood run cold. She heard Officer Miller's voice, talking to someone on the phone. He was laughing, boasting about how easily he had arrested the old biddy, how she had resisted and obstructed justice. He was clearly fabricating the details of the arrest, embellishing the story to make himself look good and to justify his actions. Eleanor's anger surged. She was not just a victim of a wrongful arrest. She was a victim of a deliberate frame-up, a conspiracy to silence her, to discredit her. She heard another voice, a voice she didn't recognize, asking about the evidence. Officer Miller assured the person on the other end that the evidence had been planted, that the witness had been coached, that the case was airtight. Eleanor's mind raced. Evidence? Witness? What evidence? What witness? She had no idea what they were talking about, but she knew it was all a lie. She realized that she was not just dealing with a couple of road cops. She was dealing with a system of corruption, A network of individuals who were willing to abuse their power, to violate the law, to destroy innocent lives. And she, Eleanor Davis, was in the middle of it. She knew she had to be smart, she had to be careful, and she had to find a way to expose the truth. She had to gather evidence, to document their lies, to find a way to fight back. She started by memorizing everything she heard, every detail, every nuance. She committed Officer Miller's voice to memory, his tone, his inflection, his choice of words. She mentally cataloged the layout of the precinct, the faces of the officers, the sounds and smells of the environment. She was a teacher, a scholar, a woman of intellect and observation. She would use her skills, her intelligence, her experience to unravel this conspiracy, to clear her name, and to bring the perpetrators to justice. She would not be a victim. She would be a witness, a survivor, a fighter. Hours passed, and Eleanor remained alone in the interrogation room, the handcuffs cutting into her wrists, her body aching from the hard chair. She had asked for a lawyer repeatedly, but her requests had been ignored. She had been denied food and water, and the only human contact she had was the occasional glimpse of Officer Miller or Officer Jones passing by the door, their faces smug and dismissive. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Officer Miller entered the room, a sneer on his face. "Well, Mrs. Davis," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "have you had enough time to think about your actions?" Eleanor looked him straight in the eye, her expression unwavering. "I have done nothing wrong, Officer Miller," she said, her voice calm but firm, "and I demand to speak to my lawyer." Miller chuckled. "You're in no position to demand anything, old woman. You're under arrest, and you're going to jail." "We'll see about that," Eleanor said, her voice laced with a quiet confidence that surprised even herself. Miller leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you? But you're no match for us. We have evidence, witnesses, everything we need to put you away for a long time." Eleanor didn't flinch. "Your evidence is fabricated, your witnesses are liars, and your actions are a disgrace to the badge you wear," she said, her voice unwavering. Miller's sneer vanished, replaced by a flicker of anger. "You're digging yourself a deeper hole, Mrs. Davis," he said, his voice threatening. "I suggest you cooperate." "I will cooperate with the truth," Eleanor said. "And the truth will expose your lies." Miller straightened up, his face a mask of contempt. "Fine," he said. "Have it your way. You'll have plenty of time to think about your mistakes in a cell." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and one more thing," he said, turning back to Eleanor. "We're allowed to give you one phone call." He gestured towards a phone on the wall. He left the room, a smirk playing on his lips. He fully expected her to call a family member to pick up the mess. It was likely she'd call her son. He was excited to see how far that phone call would go. Eleanor waited until he was gone, then slowly rose to her feet, her body stiff and sore. She walked to the phone, her mind racing. She knew this was her one chance, her one opportunity to reach out for help. She didn't hesitate. She knew exactly who to call. She dialed the number, her fingers trembling slightly. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, a familiar voice answered. "Hello, Eric," Eleanor said, her voice filled with relief. "It's Mom." On the other end of the line, Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, sat up straight in his chair, his expression instantly shifting from relaxed to concerned. "Mom," he said, his voice sharp and alert. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to control her emotions. "Eric, I'm in trouble," she said. "I've been arrested." Eric's mind raced. His mother, arrested. It was unthinkable. She was the most law-abiding person he knew. "Arrested," he repeated, his voice incredulous. "For what?" Eleanor quickly explained the situation, recounting the events of the afternoon, the false accusations, the aggressive behavior of the officers, the feeling of being trapped in a corrupt system. As Eric listened, his anger grew. He knew his mother, and he knew she would never lie to him. He also knew that police corruption was a real and pervasive problem, one that he had dedicated his career to fighting. "Mom, stay calm," he said, his voice firm and reassuring. "I'm on my way. I'll be there as soon as I can. Don't say anything to anyone, don't sign anything, and don't resist. Just wait for me." "I will, Eric," Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you." "I love you, Mom," Eric said. "I'll see you soon." He hung up the phone, his mind already racing, formulating a plan. He was not just a son coming to his mother's aid. He was the Attorney General of the United States, the chief law enforcement officer of the country. And he would use every ounce of his power, every resource at his disposal, to protect his mother, to expose the corruption, and to bring the perpetrators to justice. Eleanor sat back down in the uncomfortable chair, a newfound sense of hope filling her heart. She knew Eric would come, and she knew he would fight for her. But she also knew that she couldn't just sit there and wait. She had to do her part, to gather whatever evidence she could, to help him build a case against the corrupt officers. She closed her eyes, replaying the events of the past few hours, trying to recall every detail, every conversation, every nuance. She focused on Officer Miller's words, on his phone conversation, on the mention of evidence and a witness. She realized that the key to exposing the truth was to find out what evidence they had planted and who their so-called witness was. She had to find a way to discredit their lies, to prove her innocence. She opened her eyes, her gaze sweeping around the interrogation room. She noticed a small, metal cabinet in the corner, partially hidden behind the table. She wondered if it contained anything of interest, any clue that might help her. She waited until she heard the sounds of footsteps receding down the hallway. Then she slowly rose to her feet, her body stiff and sore. She moved as quietly as possible, her bare feet making almost no sound on the linoleum floor. She reached the cabinet and cautiously opened the door. Inside, she found a stack of files, some loose papers, and a few pieces of what looked like evidence, a small, plastic bag containing a white powder, and a handgun. Her heart skipped a beat. She recognized the items instantly. They were the evidence Officer Miller had been talking about. They had planted drugs and a weapon on her, or were planning to claim they had found them in her possession. She carefully examined the files, scanning the names and addresses. She recognized some of the names. They were local residents, people she knew from her community. She realized that she was not the only victim of this precinct's corruption. They had been framing innocent people, ruining lives, for their own personal gain. She found a file with her own name on it. She opened it and found a fabricated police report detailing her supposed obstruction of justice and resisting arrest. The report was filled with lies, exaggerations, and outright fabrications. She also found a statement from a witness, a man named Frank Rizzo, who claimed to have seen her interfering with a police investigation. She didn't know Rizzo, but she suspected he was a paid informant, a pawn in the officer's game. She carefully memorized the details of the report and the witness statement, knowing that she would need to recount them later. She then closed the file and placed it back in the cabinet, exactly as she had found it. She then noticed something else in the cabinet, a small, digital voice recorder. She picked it up, her heart pounding. She pressed the play button and heard Officer Miller's voice, talking to Officer Jones. They were discussing Eleanor's arrest, laughing about how easily they had framed her, and how much money they would make from the deal. They were also talking about their connections to higher-ups, mentioning a judge and even the mayor, who were apparently involved in their scheme. Eleanor listened intently, her blood boiling with anger. This was the evidence she needed, the proof of their corruption, the key to exposing their lies. She carefully placed the recorder back in the cabinet, her mind racing. She had to find a way to get this information to Eric, to ensure that it wouldn't be discovered and destroyed. She knew she was taking a risk, but she was determined to fight back. She was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for all the innocent people who had been victimized by this corrupt precinct. She was fighting for justice, for truth, for the principles she had instilled in her son. The hours crawled by, each minute feeling like an eternity. Eleanor remained in the interrogation room, her mind sharp, her senses alert. She had managed to conceal a small pen and a scrap of paper she'd found in the cabinet, and she used them to jot down notes, recording key details from the voice recorder and the fabricated police report. Finally, she heard a commotion outside the room, raised voices, hurried footsteps, a sense of urgency. She knew it was Eric. The door burst open, and Eric strode into the room, his face a mask of controlled fury. He was a tall, imposing figure, his presence radiating power and authority. Behind him stood several men in suits, their faces grim, their eyes scanning the room. "Mom," Eric said, his voice filled with relief and concern. He rushed to her side, embracing her tightly. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Eric," Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly. "But they're lying. They framed me." Eric's eyes narrowed. "I know, Mom," he said. I know. He turned to the men behind him. These are agents from the Department of Justice, he said. They're here to investigate. Officer Miller and Officer Jones, who had been standing nervously in the hallway, suddenly appeared at the door, their faces pale, their expressions a mixture of fear and defiance. Mr. Attorney General, Officer Miller stammered. What's the meaning of this? This is a local matter. You have no jurisdiction here. Eric fixed him with a steely gaze. I have jurisdiction over any matter involving federal crimes, he said, his voice cold and authoritative. And I have reason to believe that several federal crimes have been committed in this precinct, including civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. He turned to the agents. Secure this precinct, he ordered. I want every file, every computer, every piece of evidence examined. I want every officer interviewed. And I want these 2 officers taken into custody. The agents moved swiftly, following Eric's commands. Officer Miller and Officer Jones, their bravado gone, offered little resistance. They were handcuffed and led away, their faces ashen, their careers in ruins. Eric turned back to his mother, his expression softening. Mom, I'm so sorry this happened to you, he said. But I promise you, we're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to expose the truth. And we're going to bring these criminals to justice. Eleanor smiled, her eyes filled with tears of relief and gratitude. I know you will, Eric, she said. I trust you. She then told him about the evidence she had found in the cabinet, the fabricated police report, the witness statement, and the digital voice recorder. She showed him the notes she had taken, recounting the details of the officers' conversations. Eric listened intently, his anger growing with each revelation. He realized that his mother had not only survived a terrifying ordeal, she had actively fought back, gathering crucial evidence that would help them build their case. He was immensely proud of her courage, her resilience, her unwavering commitment to justice. He knew that she was not just a victim, she was a hero. He took the notes from her, promising to use them to their full advantage. He then escorted her out of the precinct, away from the scene of her ordeal, towards a waiting car. As they walked, Eleanor leaned on her son's arm, feeling a sense of relief, of safety, of vindication. She had faced the darkness, and she had emerged victorious, and she had done it with the help of her son, the man she had raised to be a champion of justice. Back in Washington, D.C., Eric Holder, the Attorney General, wasted no time in launching a full-scale federal investigation into Precinct 18 of the Oakwood Police Department. He assembled a team of his most trusted investigators, prosecutors, and analysts, assigning them to the case and giving them clear instructions. Leave no stone unturned, follow every lead, and expose the truth, no matter where it led. The investigation was codenamed Operation Clean Sweep, a fitting title for the ambitious goal of rooting out corruption and restoring integrity to the beleaguered police department. Eric knew that the investigation would be challenging, complex, and potentially dangerous. He was facing a deeply entrenched system of corruption, a network of individuals who had been operating with impunity for years. They would not give up their power, their privilege, or their illicit gains easily. He also knew that the investigation would be politically sensitive. The mayor of Oakwood, Richard Thompson, was a powerful figure in the state, with close ties to influential politicians and business leaders. Exposing his involvement in the corruption scheme would have significant ramifications, potentially destabilizing the local political landscape. But Eric was undeterred. He had a duty to uphold the law, to protect the rights of all citizens, and to ensure that justice was served. He would not allow political considerations, personal connections, or threats of retaliation to sway him from his course. He started by reviewing the evidence his mother had gathered, the fabricated police report, the witness statement, and the notes she had taken from the digital voice recorder. He also reviewed the surveillance footage from the precinct, which confirmed Eleanor's account of her arrest and her treatment by the officers. He then met with Agent Garcia, the DEA agent who had assisted Victoria Winters in the Montana case. He briefed Garcia on the situation in Oakwood, sharing the evidence and requesting his assistance in the investigation. Garcia, recognizing the similarities between the Oakwood case and the Montana cartel case, readily agreed to help. He assigned a team of his agents to work alongside the Department of Justice investigators, providing their expertise in uncovering hidden networks, tracing financial transactions, and identifying corrupt officials. The investigation began in earnest, with teams of investigators fanning out across Oakwood, interviewing witnesses, reviewing records, and gathering evidence. They focused on identifying the patterns of corruption within Precinct 18, the false arrests, the planted evidence, the coerced confessions, the intimidation tactics. They discovered that the corruption was far more widespread than they had initially imagined. It involved not only police officers, but also judges, prosecutors, and even city officials. It was a deeply ingrained system of abuse, a culture of impunity that had been allowed to fester for years. As the investigation progressed, Eric faced increasing resistance. He received anonymous threats, veiled warnings from powerful individuals who wanted the investigation shut down. He was accused of political bias, of targeting innocent officials, of conducting a witch hunt, but he refused to back down. He knew he was on the right track, and he was determined to see the investigation through to its conclusion. He had the full support of the president, who had been briefed on the situation and had given him his unwavering backing. He also had the unwavering support of his mother, Eleanor, who had become a symbol of courage and resilience in the face of injustice. She had received an outpouring of support from her community, from people who had been inspired by her story, by her refusal to be silenced. Eric drew strength from his mother's example, from her unwavering belief in the power of truth and justice. He knew that he was fighting not just for her, but for all the victims of corruption, for all the people who had been denied their rights, for all those who believed in the promise of a fair and equitable legal system. The investigation into Precinct 18 proceeded meticulously, painstakingly, like a complex jigsaw puzzle being assembled piece by piece. The investigators, led by Eric's hand-picked team and assisted by Agent Garcia's D agents, worked tirelessly, following every lead, interviewing every witness, and analyzing every piece of evidence. They focused on several key areas. False arrests. They reviewed hundreds of arrest records from Precinct 18, looking for patterns of suspicious activity, inconsistencies in reports, and complaints from citizens who claimed to have been wrongly arrested. They identified numerous cases where individuals had been arrested on flimsy charges, with little or no evidence to support the accusations. Evidence tampering. They examined the physical evidence in several cases, focusing on drug arrests and weapons charges. They discovered that evidence had been tampered with, altered, or even planted to secure convictions. Witness intimidation. They interviewed witnesses who had initially cooperated with the police but had later recanted their testimony. They discovered that these witnesses had been threatened, intimidated, or even bribed by officers from Precinct 18 to change their stories. Bribery and extortion. They followed the money, tracing financial transactions between officers from Precinct 18 and known criminals, businesses, and even city officials. They uncovered a complex web of bribery and extortion, where officers were accepting payments to overlook crimes, protect illegal activities, and even frame innocent individuals. The Rizzo connection. They focused on Frank Rizzo, the witness who had supposedly seen Eleanor interfering with a police investigation. They discovered that Rizzo was a career criminal with a long history of arrests and convictions. He had a close relationship with Officer Miller and other corrupt officers, and he had been paid to provide false testimony in numerous cases. They interviewed the disillusioned police officer. As the evidence mounted, the investigators began to build a solid case against the corrupt officers and their accomplices. They used a variety of techniques, including wiretaps, surveillance, undercover operations, and forensic analysis, to gather irrefutable proof of their crimes. They also worked closely with the whistleblower, the disillusioned officer from Precinct 18 who had secretly contacted Eric. The officer, whose identity was carefully protected, provided invaluable inside information about the precinct's operations, the identities of the corrupt officers, and the extent of their criminal activities. The whistleblower's testimony was crucial in connecting the dots, in revealing the full scope of the conspiracy. He confirmed that the corruption extended beyond Precinct 18, reaching into the courts, the prosecutor's office, and even the mayor's office. The investigators discovered that Judge Thompson, a prominent local judge, had been accepting bribes from the cartel, and from connections to Precinct 18, to dismiss cases, reduce sentences, and even order the release of dangerous criminals. They also discovered that Mayor Thompson, no relation, had been receiving kickbacks from the cartel and protection money funneled through Precinct 18, in exchange for turning a blind eye to their activities and ensuring that the police department remained under their control. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, and irrefutable. Eric Holder and his team had built a rock-solid case, a case that would expose the corruption, bring the criminals to justice and restore integrity to the Oakwood legal system. But they knew that the final step, the arrests and the prosecutions, would be the most challenging. They were facing powerful individuals with vast resources and a network of loyal supporters. They had to be prepared for a fight, a legal battle that would test their skills, their resolve, and their commitment to justice. Eric, however, was confident. He had the evidence, he had the law on his side, and he had the unwavering support of his team, his mother, and the community of Oakwood. He was ready to take on the corrupt officials, to dismantle their network, and to ensure that they were held accountable for their crimes. The building of the case was complete. It was time for action. Central to the success of Operation Clean Sweep was the courageous decision of Officer Michael Davies, a 10-year veteran of Precinct 18, to come forward as a whistleblower. Davies, a man of conscience and integrity, had grown increasingly disillusioned with the rampant corruption within his precinct. He had witnessed firsthand the false arrests, the planted evidence, the intimidation tactics, and the blatant disregard for the law. He had initially tried to report the misconduct through the proper channels, but his complaints had been ignored, dismissed, and even ridiculed by his superiors. He had been warned to keep quiet, to look the other way, to be a team player. But Davies couldn't stomach the injustice, the betrayal of the public trust. He had become a police officer to serve and protect, to uphold the law, not to become a part of a criminal enterprise. He had heard about Eleanor Davis's arrest, and he had been deeply troubled by it. He knew Mrs. Davis, a respected member of the community, and he knew she was innocent. He saw her arrest as a blatant example of the precinct's abuse of power, a symbol of everything that was wrong with the system. He had secretly contacted Eric Holder after finding his direct contact information through a friend in the FBI. He had offered to provide information, to testify, to do whatever it took to expose the corruption. Eric, recognizing the importance of Davies' testimony, had taken extraordinary measures to protect him. He had placed Davies and his family under federal protection, relocating them to a secure location and providing them with new identities. Davies had provided invaluable information, identifying the key players in the corruption scheme, detailing their methods, and providing specific examples of their criminal activities. He had also helped the investigators interpret the evidence they had gathered, explaining the precinct's internal procedures, their codes, and their slang. He was a key witness, a crucial piece of the puzzle, and his testimony would be instrumental in securing convictions. But he was also a target. The corrupt officers knew that he was a threat, and they would do anything to silence him. Eric and his team took every precaution to protect Davies, ensuring his safety and anonymity. They knew that his life was on the line, and they were determined to ensure that he would be able to testify, to tell his story, to help bring the criminals to justice. Davies, despite the risks, remained steadfast in his commitment to truth and justice. He was driven by a deep sense of moral responsibility, a desire to atone for his past complicity, and a hope to restore integrity to his profession. He was a hero, a silent warrior, a man who had chosen to stand up for what was right, even when it meant risking everything. And his courage would inspire others, would embolden other officers to come forward, to break the code of silence, and to help clean up the corruption that had plagued Precinct 18 for far too long. His role was pivotal, his sacrifice immense, and his contribution to the cause of justice immeasurable. As the federal investigation into Precinct 18 gained momentum, Eleanor Davis found herself unexpectedly thrust into the spotlight. Her story, initially reported by Sarah Jenkins in the Oakwood Gazette, quickly spread, attracting the attention of regional and even national media outlets. Eleanor, a private and unassuming woman, was initially uncomfortable with the attention. She had never sought fame or notoriety. She had simply wanted to clear her name and expose the truth. But she soon realized that her story had resonated with people, that it had struck a chord with a community that had long suffered under the weight of corruption and injustice. She became a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope, and inspiration to those who had felt powerless against the system. Her neighbors, her friends, her former students, and even strangers rallied around her, offering their support, their encouragement, and their gratitude. They organized rallies, held prayer vigils, and wrote letters to the editor demanding justice for Eleanor and accountability for the corrupt officials. The community's support was overwhelming, a testament to Eleanor's reputation, her integrity, and her long-standing commitment to Oakwood. It was also a reflection of the deep-seated anger and frustration that many residents felt towards the corrupt police department and the city officials who had enabled their crimes. Eleanor, initially reluctant to embrace her newfound role as a public figure, gradually came to accept it, recognizing the importance of speaking out, of sharing her story, of inspiring others to fight for justice. She gave interviews to the local newspaper and television stations, recounting her ordeal with dignity and grace. She spoke at community meetings, sharing her experiences and encouraging others to come forward with their own stories of abuse and corruption. She became a voice for the voiceless, a champion for the oppressed, a symbol of hope for a community that had long been silenced by fear and intimidation. The outpouring of support was not limited to words and gestures. Local businesses offered their services to Eleanor free of charge, repairing the damage to her home caused by the police raid. Neighbors brought her meals, flowers, and cards, expressing their solidarity and their admiration. A legal defense fund was established, raising thousands of dollars to help cover Eleanor's legal expenses. The fund was a testament to the community's belief in her innocence and their determination to see justice served. Eleanor was deeply moved by the outpouring of support. She had never imagined that her personal struggle would ignite such a powerful response, that it would galvanize a community and inspire a movement for change. She realized that her fight was not just about her own vindication. It was about something much larger, something much more important. It was about restoring faith in the justice system, about holding those in power accountable, and about creating a better future for her community. She drew strength from the support she received, finding renewed courage and determination to see the fight through to the end. She was no longer alone. She had a community behind her, a powerful force for change, a testament to the enduring spirit of justice and the unwavering belief in the power of truth. As the federal investigation progressed, the net began to tighten around the corrupt officials of Oakwood. The evidence, meticulously gathered and meticulously analyzed, painted a damning picture of widespread corruption, abuse of power, and criminal conspiracy. The investigators, armed with search warrants and subpoenas, raided the homes and offices of the suspected individuals, seizing computers, documents, financial records, and other evidence. They interviewed dozens of witnesses, including current and former police officers, victims of police misconduct, and city officials. The investigation revealed a complex web of interconnected crimes, stretching from the street-level officers of Precinct 18 to the highest levels of city government. Officer Miller and Officer Jones, the two officers who had arrested Eleanor, were found to be at the center of the scheme. They had been involved in numerous false arrests, planting evidence, extorting bribes, and intimidating witnesses. They were also found to be working closely with Frank Rizzo, the career criminal who had provided false testimony against Eleanor. Judge Thompson, the local judge, was found to have accepted bribes from the cartel and connections to Precinct 18 in exchange for favorable rulings, dismissing cases, and reducing sentences. He had also used his influence to protect the corrupt officers from investigation and prosecution. Mayor Thompson, no relation, was found to have received kickbacks from the cartel and protection money from Precinct 18, in exchange for turning a blind eye to their activities and ensuring that the police department remained under their control. He had also used his position to steer city contracts to businesses owned by cartel associates. The whistleblower, Officer Davies, provided crucial testimony, confirming the investigators' findings and providing additional details about the inner workings of the corruption scheme. His testimony was corroborated by the evidence gathered through surveillance, wiretaps, and forensic analysis. As the evidence mounted, the pressure on the corrupt officials intensified. They began to turn on each other, attempting to shift blame, minimize their involvement, and cut deals with the prosecutors. The media coverage of the investigation, fueled by Sarah Jenkins's relentless reporting, kept the public informed and engaged. The citizens of Oakwood, outraged by the betrayal of trust, demanded accountability and justice. Eric Holder, overseeing the investigation from Washington, remained steadfast in his commitment to pursuing the case to its fullest extent. He resisted all attempts to interfere with the investigation, to pressure him to back down, or to negotiate a settlement. He knew that the case was about more than just punishing a few corrupt officials. It was about restoring faith in the justice system, about sending a message that no one, no matter how powerful, was above the law. He was determined to see justice done, not just for his mother, but for all the victims of the corruption, for all the citizens of Oakwood who had been denied their rights and their dignity. The net was closing in, and the corrupt officials knew that their time was running out. Their reign of terror was about to end. The culmination of Operation Clean Sweep arrived with a series of coordinated arrests, carried out by federal agents and U.S. Marshals in the early morning hours. The operation was meticulously planned and flawlessly executed, targeting the key players in the Oakwood corruption scheme. Officer Miller and Officer Jones were arrested at their homes, their faces etched with shock and disbelief as they were led away in handcuffs. Frank Rizzo, the witness who had falsely accused Eleanor, was also arrested, his long criminal record adding to the weight of the charges against him. Judge Thompson was arrested at the courthouse, his chambers searched, his files seized. He was charged with bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. His carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbled, revealing the corrupt underbelly of his judicial career. Mayor Thompson was arrested at City Hall, his office surrounded by federal agents. He was charged with racketeering, extortion, money laundering, and conspiracy. His reign of power, built on a foundation of lies and corruption, came to an abrupt and ignominious end. The arrests sent shockwaves through Oakwood, dominating the news headlines and sparking a mixture of outrage, relief, and disbelief. The community, long accustomed to the pervasive corruption, finally saw a glimmer of hope, a chance for real change. Eric Holder held a press conference in Washington, D.C., announcing the arrests and detailing the charges. He praised the courage and dedication of the investigators, the prosecutors, and the whistleblower, Officer Davies. He also acknowledged the crucial role played by his mother, Eleanor Davis, in exposing the corruption. "This case is a testament to the power of one person to make a difference," Eric said, his voice filled with emotion. "My mother, Eleanor Davis, a retired school teacher, a woman of unwavering integrity, refused to be silenced. She stood up to corruption, she fought for justice, and she inspired all of us to do the same." He vowed to prosecute the defendants to the fullest extent of the law, to ensure that they were held accountable for their crimes, and to restore the public's trust in the justice system. Eleanor, watching the press conference on television from her home in Oakwood, felt a surge of pride and vindication. She had faced down her accusers, she had exposed their lies, and she had helped to bring down a corrupt system. She was surrounded by her friends and neighbors, who had gathered to offer their support and congratulations. They cheered as Eric spoke, their faces beaming with pride and gratitude. Eleanor, though still shaken by her ordeal, felt a sense of peace, a sense of closure. She had done what was right, and justice had prevailed. She had proven that even the smallest voice, when speaking truth to power, could make a difference. The arrests were a victory, not just for Eleanor, but for the entire community of Oakwood. They were a turning point, a moment of reckoning, a chance to rebuild, to reform, and to create a more just and equitable society. The trials of the corrupt Oakwood officials were held in federal court, attracting national attention. The prosecution, led by a team of experienced federal prosecutors, presented a mountain of evidence, including surveillance footage, wiretap recordings, financial records, and the testimony of numerous witnesses. But the most powerful, the most compelling testimony came from Eleanor Davis herself. Eleanor, despite her age and the trauma she had endured, took the stand with grace, dignity, and unwavering resolve. She recounted her ordeal, from the moment of her wrongful arrest to her discovery of the evidence in Precinct 18, to her phone call to her son. She spoke clearly, concisely, and with conviction. She described the officers' aggressive behavior, their fabricated charges, their attempts to intimidate her. She detailed the evidence she had found, the conversations she had overheard, the lies she had uncovered. She identified Officer Miller and Officer Jones in the courtroom, pointing them out as the men who had arrested her, framed her, and threatened her. She described their actions with chilling accuracy, her words painting a vivid picture of their abuse of power. She also spoke about the impact of the ordeal on her life, on her sense of security, on her trust in the justice system. She described the fear, the anxiety, the humiliation she had experienced. But she also spoke about the hope, the resilience, the courage she had found within herself. She spoke about the support she had received from her community, from her friends, and from her son. Her testimony was devastating, her credibility unimpeachable. The defense attorneys, representing the corrupt officials, tried to discredit her, to paint her as a confused, unreliable old woman. but their attempts failed miserably. Eleanor's testimony was too powerful, too truthful, too compelling. She had the jury's full attention, their sympathy, and their respect. She was not just a victim. She was a witness, a survivor, a fighter. She was a symbol of justice, a testament to the power of truth, a beacon of hope for a community that had long been shrouded in darkness. Her testimony, along with the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution, sealed the fate of the corrupt officials. The jury, after deliberating for only a few hours, returned guilty verdicts on all counts. The courtroom erupted in applause as the verdicts were read. Eleanor, sitting in the gallery with her son, Eric, felt a wave of relief wash over her. Justice had been served. The convictions of the corrupt Oakwood officials marked a turning point for the community. The trials had exposed the deep-seated corruption that had festered for years, and the guilty verdicts sent a clear message that such behavior would no longer be tolerated. Officer Miller and Officer Jones were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, their careers in law enforcement permanently destroyed. Frank Rizzo, the witness who had provided false testimony, was also convicted and sentenced to jail. Judge Thompson, stripped of his judicial robes and his reputation, was convicted of bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to a significant prison term, his legacy forever tarnished by his betrayal of the public trust. Mayor Thompson, his political career in ruins, was convicted of racketeering, extortion, money laundering, and conspiracy. He, too, was sentenced to prison, his once powerful grip on the city shattered. The whistleblower, Officer Davies, was granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for his testimony. He was hailed as a hero, a man of courage and integrity who had risked everything to expose the truth. He was later offered a position with the federal government, a chance to continue his law enforcement career in a more honorable environment. The convictions of the corrupt officials paved the way for sweeping reforms within the Oakwood Police Department and the city government. A new police chief was appointed, a woman of impeccable integrity and a proven track record of reform. She implemented new policies and procedures designed to prevent future abuses of power and to restore public trust. An independent oversight board was established, tasked with monitoring the police department's activities and investigating complaints of misconduct. The board was composed of community members, civil rights advocates, and legal experts, ensuring transparency and accountability. The City Council passed a series of ordinances aimed at promoting ethical conduct, transparency, and accountability in government. They established a whistleblower protection program, encouraging city employees to report corruption without fear of retaliation. The reforms were not easy, and they faced resistance from some quarters. But the community, emboldened by Eleanor's example and inspired by the outcome of the trials, remained steadfast in their demand for change. Oakwood, once a symbol of corruption and injustice, began to transform itself into a model of reform and renewal. The city, scarred by its past, began to heal, to rebuild, and to forge a new future, a future based on transparency, accountability, and respect for the rule of law. Justice had prevailed, not through violence or vengeance, but through the courage of one woman, the dedication of her son, and the unwavering commitment of a community determined to reclaim its integrity. Life in Oakwood gradually returned to normal, but it was a new normal, a normal shaped by the events of the past year. The scars of corruption remained, but they were slowly fading, replaced by a sense of hope, of renewal, of civic pride. Eleanor Davis, her ordeal behind her, returned to her quiet routine, her days filled with the familiar comforts of home, garden, and community. She continued to volunteer at the library, to attend church services, and to visit with her friends and neighbors. But she was no longer just a retired teacher, a widow living a quiet life. She was a local hero, a symbol of courage and resilience, a woman who had stood up to corruption and won. She received numerous letters and cards from people all over the country, thanking her for her bravery, her integrity, and her inspiration. She was invited to speak at schools, churches, and community events, sharing her story and encouraging others to stand up for what's right. She accepted some of these invitations, but she preferred to remain out of the spotlight, to return to the quiet life she cherished. She had done her part, she had fought her battle, and she had won. Now, it was time to rest, to heal, to enjoy the peace she had earned. Her relationship with her son, Eric, deepened and strengthened. They had always been close, but the shared experience of fighting the corruption in Oakwood had forged a new bond between them, a bond of mutual respect, admiration, and unwavering love. Eric, though busy with his duties as Attorney General, made sure to visit his mother more frequently, spending weekends at her home in Oakwood, sharing meals, conversations, and quiet moments of reflection. He was immensely proud of her courage, her resilience, and her unwavering commitment to justice. He knew that he owed her everything, that she had shaped him into the man he had become, that her example had inspired his career and his dedication to public service. One Sunday afternoon, as they sat together on her porch, watching the sunset over the quiet streets of Oakwood, Eric turned to his mother and said, "Mom, I've been thinking. I want to create a foundation in your name. The Eleanor Davis Foundation for Justice and Integrity." Eleanor was surprised, touched, and a little overwhelmed. "Eric, that's a wonderful idea," she said. "But I don't need a foundation. I don't need any recognition." "It's not about recognition, Mom," Eric said. "It's about honoring your legacy, about continuing the fight for justice, about helping others who have been victims of corruption and abuse of power." He explained his vision for the foundation: to provide legal assistance to victims of police misconduct, to support whistleblower protection programs, to promote ethical conduct in government, and to educate the public about their rights. Eleanor, seeing the passion in her son's eyes, the genuine desire to make a difference, agreed. She knew that the foundation would be a fitting tribute to her experience, a way to turn her personal struggle into a force for positive change. The Eleanor Davis Foundation for Justice and Integrity was established, and it quickly became a powerful voice for reform, a beacon of hope for those who had been wronged by the system. Eleanor, though she remained in the background, served as an inspiration, a reminder that one person, with courage and determination, could make a difference, could challenge the powerful, and could achieve justice. Her quiet life had been disrupted, her peace shattered, but in its place, she had found a new purpose, a new strength, a new legacy. She had faced the darkness, and she had emerged victorious, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, the unwavering pursuit of truth, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. The story ended, not with a dramatic climax, but with a quiet sense of satisfaction, a feeling that justice had been served, that good had triumphed over evil, and that the world, in its own small way, had been made a better place.